Resident Evil 3 Remake. What can I say about you? I could say you're a good game, and it's true. I could also say that you are the reason why I no longer buy games on day one. That is also true. What is definitely true is I'm not angry about how you turned out. I'm just disappointed, and that is so much worse. I'm Chris from Yorkshire Guy Gaming. Join me as I break down why Resident Evil 3 Remake broke me. Firstly, let's take things all the way back to the year 2000. February to be exact. A new millennium had dawned. People were happy because the Y2K bug hadn't destroyed the world. People were desperately trying to avoid calling the decade the noughties, and everybody was convinced that this new century would usher in a new golden age for mankind where nothing would ever go wrong. Any day for that one now, yeah? For my part, I had just turned 18, and yes, I am that old. Adulthood had yet to hit me like Thor's hammer, and I was practically giddy for the release of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. On release day, I snapped the game up and got stuck right into it, and it was fantastic. It was more action orientated than its predecessors, but I had no problem with that. And while the main game may have been shorter, thanks to things like the introduction of live selection, unpredictability of certain enemies, and the incredible mercenaries mode, I always found plenty of reasons to come back and replay the game. The piece de resistance, though, is of course the titular Nemesis. His fearsome presence, unpredictability, and sheer refusal to stop in his pursuit of Jill instantly made him not just one of the best antagonists in Resident Evil, but one of the best in gaming, full stop. Fast forward 19 years, and adulthood had hit me to the point where I now make strange noises when I get up off the sofa. One thing hadn't changed though, my enjoyment of the Resident Evil series. And the release of the Resident Evil 2 remake brought back all those same giddy feelings I had years ago. RE2 Remake turned out to be an unqualified success. The game hadn't just seen technical improvements. Basic zombies were now much more of a threat, supporting characters felt much more fleshed out, and their playable sections of the game were much more enjoyable over the original. Mr. X was a particular highlight. He was much more of a threat this time round, with his relentless stalking of the player bearing much more of a resemblance to the Nemesis of old. This new Mr. X made fans very excited for what we might expect for the new Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 Remake. This game was deservedly many people's Game of the Year, myself included. It set the bar for what a remake should be, and sits highly in my top 10 games of all time. Moving on to 2020 now, and the world had completely shut down thanks to that illness that YouTube doesn't like me to mention, and Capcom decided that what we absolutely all needed to play was a game about a viral outbreak. I suppose it's testament to the love we all have for Resident Evil that they were right. Expectations for this game were high, and while the redesigned Nemesis had not been met with universal praise, a demo for the game had been, and this convinced many fans to part with their money before launch and pre-order, myself included, which as it turned out was a decision I regretted so much after release that I promised never to buy a game again on day one. I need to start off by saying that Resident Evil 3 Remake is not a bad game. It's a good game. Graphics and gameplay are on a par with RE2 Remake, an increase in action tracks with the original Nemesis. Carlos is a much more well-rounded character, likeable and genuinely funny in places.
Now here's a weird fucking door. Leave it!
The redesigned Jill is a real standout for me. Jill's always been my favourite character, despite her inability to punch a boulder, and has been criminally underused in the series. Jill is a real badass in this game, and despite the overwhelming odds against her, never looks like a damsel in distress. Her look is on point, right the way down to the fact that she now looks like she's ready for a zombie apocalypse, as opposed to her nightclub outfit from the original game. Capcom have done a good job of portraying Jill as a really strong character, and that she won't accept being talked down to, and does not need or want to be protected by the male characters in the game.
I've got this.
I know you do.
All this brings us to the tyrant in the room, Nemesis. While Mr. X had been vastly improved in the RE2 remake, and fans expected that to be a basis for how Nemesis would operate in this game, they were sorely disappointed. Yes, Nemesis is fast, strong, and a definite threat when he's on screen. The problem is he's just not on screen enough. Aside from one section where he hunts you through the city, every other encounter is scripted. He should have been relentless throughout the game. He seems like a real missed opportunity. and now whenever people talk about great antagonists in gaming and they mention Nemesis, it'll come with the caveat of the original, not the remake. The live selections were an exciting gimmick in the original game, and their removal for this game seems like a bizarre choice. This is just one of several things that have been omitted from the game, though to its detriment. Removal of full sections like the clock tower, or enemies like the spiders, all hurt the game. When RE2 Remake removed aspects from the original game, there was always plenty added in its place that the player never felt like they had lost anything. This isn't the case in RE3. So many things have been removed and just nothing's been put in to replace it. All this significantly hurts the runtime of the game, and while the original was short, there was still plenty there that you didn't feel shortchanged. By removing things and not putting anything in, you definitely feel shortchanged by the end of this game. A first playthrough, when you're looking around trying to see everything and taking your time, you're looking at around the 6 hour mark, which isn't unreasonable for a game. There are plenty of games that are 6 hours long and thoroughly enjoyable. The problem is at the end of that 6 hours, the game is completely done. There's no DLC, Mercenaries mode has been removed, which is a crime in my opinion. The game does offer replayability in order to unlock different weapons, but this just highlights another flaw. A gamer of average skill, of which I count myself, can get through this game from start to finish in around an hour. Fans of the game will point to Project Resistance as a way of getting much more value out of the game, and while it's true it's certainly extra content, how many Resident Evil fans really buy a Resident Evil game for multiplayer? This isn't Call of Duty. You can't get away with having a tacked on single player mode just for the multiplayer experience. Capcom appeared desperate to tap into the multiplayer market for Resident Evil, but it just doesn't seem to be working. Hopefully they'll just give up on it soon and concentrate on making stellar single player games. Project Resistance in and of itself didn't seem bad. If you like multiplayer games, then you may like this. I'm not a multiplayer player, so this was nothing for me, but again it's down to personal preference for that one. This game cost £50 at launch, the same price as RE2 Remake, and simply put, it wasn't worth that much. At best, it was worth half that. This game for me had an air of minimum effort, maximum profit for Capcom, and that is a huge slap in the face to the Resident Evil fans. It felt like the priority wasn't in making a great remake of Nemesis, but in trying to unlock the money attached to multiplayer gaming. It's a shame that Resident Evil 3 will be remembered not as a great game from the past, but as a disappointment from the present. I think the biggest overall problem with Resident Evil 3 Remake is ironically nothing to do with the game itself. It's the original game and Resident Evil 2 Remake. Take those away and the RE3 Remake would have probably been very well received. The original game made it glaringly obvious what had been omitted from the remake, and the Resident Evil 2 remake showed that it can be done properly by Capcom. Where RE2 looked like Capcom had really put the effort in and were really trying to put out a stellar game, RE3 looked like they weren't really trying and just had a that'll do attitude. Moving forward, hopefully the disappointment of Resident Evil 3 remake will teach some lessons. Personally, it's taught me to wait for reviews of a game to find out how good it actually is before I shell out for it, regardless of how excited I am before launch. And hopefully for Capcom, they've learned that they can't get away with phoning it in and just throwing out a token remake and expecting fans to enjoy it just because it's a much loved series. Here's hoping for the future, and the potential Resident Evil 4 remake is up there with RE2 remake, not RE3. Thanks for watching guys, I've been Chris from Yorkshire Guy Gaming. You can follow me on Twitter at YorksGuyGaming. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, it really helps us out and I'd really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.